Lamis Deek is a good friend of mine, a Palestinian-American attorney out of New York, but that's only the half of it. She's a Palestinian-American and one of the most hardworking and eloquent champions of Palestine in the whole of the United States. And it's been some time since I saw her, so I'm very grateful, Lamis, for your attendance this evening on the mother of all talk shows. Now, the ICJ first, if we can. Then I want to talk about the situation between the apartheid state and the people of Yemen, the people of Lebanon. Are we on the brink of, especially as the US now has a void in the White House, are we on the brink of something big? But let's start with the ICJ, not least because you are yourself a lawyer. How significant was the verdict, long awaited, of the ICJ in your view?
I think that this is a pivotal moment in Palestinian history. That's how I would mark it. Not because the ICJ said anything that we didn't know. I mean, as you said, yes, ICJ, lipstick on the pig on one hand, but I think what it did is it wiped the lipstick off the pigs and has been forcing them to confront themselves, has been forcing international law, the UN international system, and states to confront themselves and either admit that they have relegated and lay waste to law for justice and peace, or accept and begin a new era. And I think the onus is on them. It is just a declaratory judgment. I know a lot of people, and I'd like to address this if that's okay. And by the way, thank you for that moving and kind introduction, George. Many things are not pleasurable these days as a Palestinian. Seeing you, one of our heroes, the progress that you've made for all social justice causes is truly a pleasure and delight to be with you, and I thank you. This is a declaratory judgment, right? They articulated everything that Palestinians and their allies and you have been saying for the past 58 years and 76 years. So it's declaratory. It's an affirmation and a reaffirmation of law. But this is, in fact, it is, a conviction in the highest court of the world, in the only and highest legal organ of the United Nations, which means that this bears a lot of weight. And there are numerous critical features of this opinion that I think haven't been discussed. You well know, George, that one of Israel's strongest games and strategies has been to create facts on the ground and then force the international system to reply and revolve around these facts on the ground. And what the ICJ has said, all of that is meaningless. It doesn't matter how big your settlements are, how many settlers you have, how big your prisons and dungeons and military bases are, they all have to leave. It has laid waste to the Israeli strategy of facts on the ground making law, which also means that all of the instruments and legal names for all of the criminal acts that they have taken, unprecedented in nature and duration, are not legitimate. This is huge. This speaks to the prison system. This speaks to the convictions. This speaks to the support that these illegalities have been given by the Western world, i.e. consider the terrorism designation, because the ICJ has also said that Palestinian resistance to these illegalities, i.e. war crimes and crimes against humanity, is itself legitimate, number one, and that self-defense by Israel is not legitimate, and that their claim of self-defense, the entire justification of self-defense for all of their apparatuses, physical, legal, military, settlement, and otherwise, are lies. And this is the other really critical feature of the ICJ decision. If people read it clearly, it's a short decision. They've said all of these things are lies. And you raised UN Resolution 242, and I think it's important to have a bit of a broad and detailed approach to the reading of this decision. But given that 242 repeatedly reinforces the Israeli narrative of the need for security and land swaps, this also brings into question the legitimacy and the nature of Resolution 242, even if it's been referred to. So I think those are two of some of the most critical features. I've got more to say, but I do want to let you interrupt me and guide it to basically discuss what do we do now and why is this pivotal? This is pivotal because there's been trillions of dollars spent on this, right? This has also laid waste to the myth of Israeli democracy, of Western morality in their support of the Israeli apartheid for genocide and colonize for genocide project. This has laid waste to Western credibility, and I don't mean just the governments, but society and media at large, who have regurgitated and enforced and imposed Israeli mythology for the purpose of colonization and genocide. And this is very important for the rest of the world to see and understand that these are all lies. All of the systems that have been built around this, the trillions of dollars, the normalization projects, including many of our current and former administrations here in the US, have all been laid to waste by this ICJ decision, alongside the negotiation posture between, mind you, the Palestinian Authority and not the PLO, which is the only legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. The Palestinian Authority has not been elected by the Palestinian people, right? The negotiation terms have now completely repivoted and should be returning, and I'm not saying that Oslo is legitimate, to the core issues of Palestinian return, reparations, self-determination. So you can cut me off or I can keep going and talk about another critical feature, which is the court's finding and reaffirmation of self-determination being inalienable to Palestinians. It didn't say inalienable only to Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. It said inalienable to Palestinians. This opens the door for many things and work to come. And I think you nailed it in, everything that you've said before. Nothing is self-executing. This opinion is not self-executing. The laws, justice, morality is not self-executing. And that's on us. I'll concede to you, and I can talk more about both the critical features, the potential for how we can use this, what this means for the rest of Palestine and Palestinians, the majority of whom do not live in the West Bank and Gaza, and perhaps what we could do moving forward. George.
Well, I think you have peerlessly demolished the dissenting voices, if there are any. They seem to be treating the ICJ as if it never happened, rather than contest its legally incontestable findings. But you have demolished any possible lines of defense of the Israeli position, which, if I may summarize, all the territory, including East Jerusalem, is illegally occupied territory. Illegally occupied territory cannot be held onto for 55 plus years, 75 plus years. Then it becomes an attempt at permanent occupation. If you have permanent occupation, it's first of all illegal, but must involve a secondary crime, namely of an apartheid system to stop the people of that illegally occupied territory having a say in how they are governed and what their purpose is. The third thing you touched on, which is very important to me, because I did not get involved in this subject 50 years ago for the people of the West Bank and Gaza. I'd never been in the West Bank or Gaza then. I got involved in this because of the millions of Palestinians living in refugee camps in other countries altogether, and their right to return to their homes. They are now included in this subject in the way that they were excluded by Oslo, which failed to address their right to return. But now the court has vindicated their inalienable, i.e. cannot be changed by anybody, by any negotiation, by any treaty. A negotiation cannot overrule someone's inalienable rights. So the Palestinian right to return is another great victor of this court decision. So it's plain that they intend to ignore the court's decision. Although I noted that Mr. Lavrov said this week that Russia can no longer be an observer to these events that are taking place, not just in Palestine, but vis-a-vis the neighboring countries also. I saw Mr. Lavrov's not a man that speaks idly or loosely. He meant something by that. And I'm thinking that some Russian, Chinese, India, whatever BRICS move is coming. But if they ignore the verdict of the ICJ, that leaves us feeling good because we're vindicated, but it doesn't bring much relief to your people, the Palestinian people, does it?
Not immediately. And I think you touched on this a few times today, but in many prior instances and shows, George, which is this is cumulative. And this is a matter of leveraging and bargaining power. I do want to highlight a couple of more critical features so that we can understand, and I'd like you and others to understand how this can all be leveraged. I alluded to the deconstruction of Israeli lies and the failure of justifications for those lies. This implicates how Palestinians are treated throughout the world, even within Palestine in the 1948 territories and in the refugee camps. But moving on, aside from finding that Palestinians have the right to go back to their homes, what the ICJ also clearly stated was that Palestinians have the right to reparations, and then clarified that reparations included reparations, restitution, and satisfaction, taken in the context that the Palestinian people are defined as a whole and their rights are now treated as a whole from the highest UN organ and international court. This becomes very critical into how does this get leveraged for bargaining power. I think that that is critical. The other element is the finding that Gaza and the West Bank are one, and this cannot be reconciled without looking at and reaffirming both these two last features, Resolution 194, and perhaps even reconsidering Resolution 181. Now, the ICJ also kicked it back over to the UN General Assembly, and they said, go and find and figure out the modalities. Well, that means that governments with proper learned counsel, right, diplomatic advocates, legal advocates would be willing and have a broad swath of mechanisms, legal mechanisms, to begin implementing these rights, even if it's incremental, right? While at the same time, those who are naturally prone or will be more inclined, given the turn of global events, to take a more firm stand are also now more well equipped legally with the voice of justice, with this ruling, and with a clear, deconstructed, briefed, legally and diplomatically briefed agenda of how to implement Palestinian rights and ensure Palestinian liberation. I think this also speaks to the main topic at our hand, which it should be, which is the role of Yemen. Yemen has, since inception, been the only country that has been implementing Article 1 of the Genocide Convention. Well, now they can say that they're also implementing the ICJ opinion today, which is a full boycott, divestment, and sanctions, not just for weapons and jet fuel and settlement construction equipment, prison and dungeon equipment, human resources, the terrorists who are flying in from all over the world to come and colonize. They just burned my town for the umpteenth time yesterday again, George, yeah? Coming from all over the world to do this. The Pakistani government saying that Netanyahu is now designated a terrorist. The Yemeni government designating Israeli officials and US officials as terrorists, as they began to implement the legal, and we've briefed this issue out, the legal blockade of material support to genocide in Palestine by the Israelis. All of this becomes cumulative. And what this does, and I think it's important people take this away, law and discourse and society have a symbiotic relationship. One develops and creates and recreates each other. And so discourse will help further the law, and now the law will further the discourse and the grassroots movement. There's a markedly different bargaining and leverage power from the highest level of state government to the lowest grassroots level. It's a different dynamic when you walk in with your counsel, right? And you have a briefed issue when you're fired, when you're moving to divest, when you've got a ceasefire resolution, than it is to just say these things. And now we are armed in a way that is different. We understand absent direct military intervention, there isn't hope. But I do want to just briefly on that, I'm sorry, George, I know I'm going on. It's kicked over to the UN General Assembly. That doesn't stop the UN General Assembly from moving to take actions even over the objection of the UN Security Council at this point. So there's also hope for more meaningful international and state intervention, I think, at this point as well.
On the subject of Yemen, I saw something beautiful you wrote the other day, that Arabic is the most poetic of languages, but no poetry could fully do justice to the heroism is also too small a word. There's something sublime, divine about the millions in Yemen, thousands of miles away, who could easily turn their faces away and would have more justification for doing so than most, being themselves regularly the subject of war and invasion and mass poverty and the rest. And yet this people, this Yemeni people, are the people who, more than any other in the whole world, have been ready to stand up and perchance to die to defend Gaza. This is, it's writing their name in the stars, is it not?
Indeed, and their names have been written in the stars previously, and I think you nailed it. You know, this gives me chills to think about. I went to Yemen, I believe it was 2010, I don't recall. Within the first hour, George, it was unmistakably clear that this was a people that could not be defeated. And what was it that I saw within that first hour that made that crystal clear? Was that this is a people that had a depth of love and a prioritization of community and the other for each other, and had the capacity, because they're driven by that passion of love for humanity, had the capacity and the commitment to enforce that love. And that is what we are watching. Yes, law gives us the tools and the analysis and the language. But to me, from what I saw and what I have seen and what we have heard, not just previously, but throughout the history of Yemen, especially most recently, this is love with enforcement in its indeed most divine form. I do believe that Yemen's history has proven itself, not just in the recent future, but in the past, countless attempts to subjugate the Yemenis to a Western globalized concept of how their societies and economies should run have failed. A lot of money and equipment put into it since 9/11, soldiers and otherwise. All of that has failed. We are hopeful about their capacity, though we worry for them and love them reciprocally and their people and wish them no harm. Yemen sits in a sea of Arab states who are not just inactive, but who are actively supporting Israel. We have long said as Palestinians, we don't need your support, but we'd like you to start supporting our murderers and our oppressors. And Yemen is not only not assisting, but is sacrificing itself, its economy, its people, and its safety. These past 3 weeks, I have to say this, George, these past 3 weeks have been especially difficult for Palestinians, not just in Gaza and the West Bank, but I think there has been an exhaustion, a pain, and a collapse that we have not seen since the beginning of the genocide. It had given me cause for concern myself, and Yemen has just restored our breath.
MashaAllah. Thank you very much, Lamis Deek, attorney at law and inexhaustible political activist for Palestine. Thanks for joining us.